Picture a room that barely qualifies as one. Clay walls, oil lamp struggling against itself, the smell of heat and wet straw and something that isn't right. And you can tell from the way the women around the bed have gone quiet. No one is saying prayers. No one is reassuring the woman whose hands are slick and whose breathing has turned shallow and strange. One of them presses something into her palm, small, carved from bone or clay or faience, depending on where you are, depending on the century. A figure, winged, dog face, scorpion tail, 4 wings, 2 up and 2 down, the front claws of an eagle, the hind legs of a bird of prey, a body that looks like something assembled from the worst things in a hunting catalogue. And this is what they give her for protection, not a symbol of warmth, not a gentle deity, not a figure that looks like it cares about her at all. The logic behind that choice is the reason you're here, because Mesopotamian women during labor, from at least the 2nd millennium BCE, documented across cuneiform tablets, now held in the British Museum in the Louvre, did not reach for comfort. They reached for something specific, something that had, on the cosmic hierarchy of threats, outranked everything that could walk through that door. His name was Pazuzu. He brought the southwest wind, which meant he brought fever, famine, locust swarms that stripped fields to dirt. He was the son of Hambi, king of the evil spirits. Not a minor demon, not a footnote, something that, in the oldest layers of Mesopotamian demonology, occupied a position close to the top of what you genuinely did not want, aimed at you, and they put him in her hand to keep her safe. The instinct right now is to call this superstition and move on. But that instinct is wrong. The people who made these amulets, who buried them in thresholds, who hung them in doorways, who pressed them into the hands of women in labor, were working from a coherent framework, not a primitive one, a specific one, with internal logic that has never actually stopped governing how humans handle existential threat. They weren't asking Pazuzu for mercy, they weren't praying to him, they were using him. And the difference between those two things is everything. The question is what they were using him against, because whatever was coming for that woman in that clay room, whatever required a southwest wind demon as a countermeasure, was not something you would choose to meet without one. Her name in the tablets is not recorded, but what she feared is. Lamashtu doesn't appear in later mythologies. She didn't make it into the Greek translations, didn't get absorbed cleanly into Roman frameworks, didn't survive as a named villain the way some Mesopotamian figures did, which is strange when you consider what she actually was. She attacked pregnant women, full stop, not as a side effect of something else, not collaterally. That was her function, that was what she was. The Mesopotamian explanation for why pregnancies went wrong, why infants died, why newborns came out sick or too still. Lamashtu, she brought fever to children specifically. She was, in the medical logic of the ancient world, the disease cluster that killed the most people without distinction and without warning, given a face. She couldn't be bargained with. That part is important. Most Mesopotamian demons. And there were many, catalogued across texts like the Maklu series, a set of anti-witchcraft rituals that survived partially into the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh. Most of them responded to ritual, to offering, to the correct incantation at the correct hour, not Lamashtu. The Lamashtu tablets, several of which date to the old Babylonian period and have been excavated from Nippur and Nimrud, describe her with a consistency that is almost clinical. Lion's head, donkey's teeth, taloned feet. She nurses a pig and a dog at her breast. She wades through rivers to reach her targets. And nothing you said stopped her. No formula, no herb, no ritual sequence, except one thing. Pazuzu. Not because he was powerful enough to destroy her. The texts don't frame it that way. Something about what Pazuzu was, some quality of his dominion over the southwest wind and the fevers that rode it, made Lamashtu retreat. So when you needed protection from Lamashtu, during labor, during the weeks when a newborn was most vulnerable, you used Pazuzu, you wore him, you buried him in the threshold of the room. His face looking outward, think about the position that puts you in. You are relying on the thing that brings fever to protect you from the thing that kills infants. You are not choosing between bad and good. You are choosing between two things that can kill you, and betting that one of them will hold the other back long enough. A hired monster, an uncrossable line that only another horror can draw. It worked, in the logic of the culture, and so they kept doing it. For centuries, across Assyria, Babylon, across excavation sites at Khorsabad and Ashur, Pazuzu's amulets have been found in contexts ranging from elite households to domestic burials. He was not a fringe figure. He was the standard response to the thing everyone was afraid of. But here's what the amulets are actually saying, if you look at them straight. This was not a culture that believed in clean protection. This was not a theology of safety. The entire architecture of how they understood threat and defense was built on a different principle entirely. And that principle did not start with Pazuzu. It did not end with him either. It was how they understood reality itself. There was no devil in Mesopotamia, not in the way that concept would come to mean. No singular force of cosmic evil opposing a singular force of cosmic good, or the Mesopotamian texts describe, across the Enuma Elish, across the Atrahasis, across the demon catalogues that scribes at Nineveh copied and preserved in Ashurbanipal's 7th century BCE library, is something more like a field. Forces, directions, categories of power that overlapped and sometimes collided and sometimes struck arrangements with each other. Pazuzu was not evil in any absolute sense. He was the southwest wind. He was the hot season's worst consequences. He was a force with a domain. And within that domain, he was sovereign, which meant he could be leveraged. The amulets are small. That's something archaeologists noted specifically. The Pazuzu figurines recovered from Nimrud, from Nineveh, from private household contexts are not imposing objects. They're not the size of something you'd worship. They're the size of something you'd carry. A few centimeters, held in one hand, sometimes worn around the neck on a cord. Deliberate smallness. You were not enshrining him. You were deploying him, like a weapon, but a weapon you held at arm's length, pointed outward, not something you pressed to your chest with confidence. That distinction matters enormously, because what it implies about protection is specific. Protection requires proximity to danger, not distance from it. You don't get safe by moving away from the threat. You get safe by making sure the threat is flanked by something it recognizes as worse. There were threshold burials of Pazuzu figures. Archaeologists found them under doorways, literally under the floor at entrances, invisible, buried there to keep what couldn't enter from entering. Not a ward, not a prayer, an installation, something planted in the ground like a trap. And the thing about Mesopotamian cosmology that makes this coherent rather than just strange is that it didn't assume the world was supposed to be safe. The texts do not describe safety as the natural state that evil has disrupted. They describe the world as a negotiated zone. Humans exist in a gap between forces that are not interested in them. The job of ritual, of amulet, of incantation was not to restore some original peace. It was to manage the negotiation, to keep the balance tilted in your favor for now. That's a different relationship with reality than most people in the contemporary world are working from. And it raises a question that the people who made those amulets never had to answer, because for them the answer was obvious. What do you do when your protection also has the capacity to destroy you? Pazuzu brought fever. He could kill children. He did kill children. In bad seasons, in the wrong wind from the southwest, and yet there he was, in the hand of a woman in labor. The Mesopotamians had apparently made their peace with that. A new system arrived that had not. And what that new system did to Pazuzu was not simply replace him with something better. It was more precise than that, more deliberate, and it tells you something about what becomes unacceptable when a civilization decides it can no longer tolerate ambiguity in its protectors. The Solomonic grimoires are not a single text, they're a category. The Key of Solomon, the Lamashtu, the Guichia, texts compiled across medieval and Renaissance Europe by scribes who were doing something specific, taking every pre-Christian entity they could find and slotting it into a new architecture, ranking demons, naming their functions, assigning them seals and hours and subordinate spirits. It looks like scholarship. It was also an act of containment, because the new framework had a structural problem and the older entities exposed it. Mesopotamian figures like Pazuzu didn't fit, not because they were too powerful, because they were too complicated. Christian demonology had one foundational rule: demons destroy. That's what they are. Evil is not a tool, not a direction, not a negotiated force. Evil is absolute. It opposes the divine in kind and nature. No gradations, no exceptions. The moment you allow a demon to protect you, that wall cracks. Think about what it means structurally. If a demon can guard a pregnant woman, if darkness can be positioned between you and something worse, then the boundary between divine protection and demonic deployment becomes a matter of degree, not category. You start asking, how evil is too evil? Is a demon that saves your child the same as a demon that kills your neighbor? If outcomes determine morality, the whole edifice shifts. The church could not allow that question to be live, so they closed it, not by engaging with it, by making evil categorical, absolute, non-negotiable. A demon cannot protect you because that is not what demons are. Demons are the enemy. Pazuzu got translated accordingly. He appears in later demonological traditions as a prince of pestilence, a title that is technically accurate. He did bring fever. He did carry the southwest wind's worst cargo, but the other half, the function that made Mesopotamian women press his image into their palms, that half is simply absent, not disputed, not addressed, gone, as if it never existed, because within the new framework it couldn't have. A demon that guards pregnant women doesn't fit, so that demon is not what he was. He is now something else. That kind of erasure requires intent. William Peter Blatty understood, at some level, that he was working with older material. His research for The Exorcist included genuine engagement with Mesopotamian archaeology. The amulet that opens the film, Meron excavating it in the Iraqi desert, is not invented. The connection between Pazuzu and that site is grounded. Blatty knew what he had found, but the story he built around it is Christian in its bones. Pazuzu in The Exorcist is a pure aggressor. He invades, he possesses, he has no prior relationship with humanity that was anything other than hostile. There is no protective function, no negotiated role, no ancient bargain. He is the enemy. Meron fights him, the church fights him. Good opposes evil. The categories are clean, and Friedkin's camera makes those clean categories feel like the truth. The production design, the choice to open in Iraq, it gestures at something older, but the frame around it is entirely medieval. The complexity got buried under the story that needed complexity to disappear, which raises the question the film never asks. If Pazuzu was protection, if that is what he was built for, what women carried him for, what he actually did in the oldest record we have, then what does it mean that we needed to turn him into pure threat? What was at stake in forgetting that? The answer is not theological. It's older than theology, and it didn't stay buried. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped a uranium bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a plutonium bomb on Nagasaki. The war ended shortly after. Within 4 years, the Soviet Union had tested its own device. Within a decade, both sides had built enough to make the question of who fired first largely irrelevant. The second strike would be sufficient. The planet would not recover. Both sides knew this. Both sides kept building anyway. The doctrine that came out of this is called mutually assured destruction. The name is honest in a way that policy language rarely is. Assured. Not probable. Not likely. Assured. Both parties understood that using the weapon meant receiving the weapon. The only way the deterrent worked was if everyone was certain the response would come, and the response would end them. So you achieve safety not by removing the threat, but by making the threat's use unsurvivable. The guardian is also the thing that kills you if it misfires. The protection and the annihilation are the same object. That is Pazuzu, exactly. The structure is identical. The Mesopotamian woman pressing a fevered demon against her skin so that what was coming for her child would recognize it and stop. She was not safe. Pazuzu could kill her. He had killed others in bad seasons, in the wrong wind. She held him anyway. Because the alternative, facing Lamashtu without a countermeasure, was worse. That is not superstition. That is deterrence theory, written in clay, 4,000 years before Eisenhower. And it did not stay in the ancient world. Security states run the same calculation, mass surveillance. The collection of everything, the total map of everyone's communication and movement, functions as a deterrent the same way Pazuzu did. The threat is not that the information will be used. The threat is that it could be. The knowledge that you are visible, that everything is recorded, is supposed to stop the thing the state is afraid of before it acts. The watcher is also a threat to the watched. Everyone knows it. The system works, to whatever degree it works, because of that knowledge. Arms manufacturers have made this argument in every century that had the right weapons to make it with, the weapons are not built to be used. The weapons are built so that no one will use them. The protection is the existence of the threat. The safety is the danger, aimed outward. We didn't invent this. We didn't improve on it. We scaled it. We gave it nuclear physics and satellite networks and signals intelligence and defense budgets larger than most countries' total economic output. We built institutions around it. We named the doctrine and debated it in universities and wrote it into treaties. We made it respectable. But the structure is the Pazuzu amulet. The logic is the same logic that woman in the clay room was working from. Keep something terrible on your side so the worst thing hesitates. We just stop calling it by any name that acknowledges what it is. The woman in that room knew she was holding a monster. She pressed it into her palm with full knowledge of what it was and what it could do. She made the choice with her eyes open. We don't do that anymore. We built the monster into the foundations of the world order and told ourselves it was stability. We forgot his name. We kept the bargain. This is Mythoria. We don't tell you what demons were. We tell you what they were built to hide. If that's the kind of thinking you stay for, subscribe. There's more here than most channels are willing to go near. The amulet was never meant to save you. It was meant to make sure. The worst thing came first.